What would you sacrifice to save an entire nation? This is a true-life story movie of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster. When disaster struck Japan's Fukushima nuclear power plant, ordinary workers made extraordinary decisions to protect their country's future, risking everything in the face of unimaginable danger. Stay tuned. The year 2011 begins with normal operations at the Fukushima nuclear power facility. However, a devastating turn of events unfolds when Japan experiences its most powerful earthquake on record. Tremors ripple through the region, causing chaos within the plant as equipment topples and alarms blare. Workers in the control room act swiftly, initiating an emergency shutdown to cut power just in time. As soon as the shaking subsides, the team rushes to assess the plant's status and restore essential functions. Meanwhile, in the city, Prime Minister Azuma cancels his schedule to focus on the aftermath, assigning officials to evaluate the earthquake's damage. At the Topco Energy headquarters, Vice President Murakami declares a crisis as he announces the failure of major power stations. He orders immediate action to prioritize restoring electricity. Back at the nuclear site, employees evacuate upon receiving a tsunami alert, led by Yoshida, who directs them to the safety of a seismic-resistant building. On their way, they witness injured colleagues, a grim reminder of the disaster's toll. In the control room, the team detects a rapid pressure drop in Unit 1, prompting them to follow protocol and close the valves. Simultaneously, water levels in Unit 4 appear to be falling abnormally, leading to suspicions of malfunction. A small group is dispatched to investigate. Nearby, the evacuation shelter fills with anxious residents. Among them is Furu, who drops off his family before heading back to the plant to assist, despite it being his day off. As 3 workers head toward Unit 4 to inspect the situation, they spot unusual movement in the ocean. Within moments, a towering tsunami crashes ashore, devastating the plant. Vehicles are swept away, and water pours into buildings, plunging them into darkness. The trio narrowly escapes the initial surge, but the flooding intensifies, leaving corridors submerged and machinery unresponsive. Elsewhere in the facility, 2 workers become trapped in a sealed passageway. The tsunami smashes through, flooding the corridor and engulfing one of them entirely. The other struggles to stay above water, but is eventually forced against the ceiling by the powerful surge. In the plant's control room, initial readings suggest no abnormalities. However, as power cuts out completely, the reality becomes clear: all generators are offline. The seismic-resistant building maintains minimal operations using a gas turbine, but the team faces an unprecedented challenge. There are no training scenarios for a disaster of this scale. In Tokyo's crisis center, the government grapples with the situation. An Article 15 alert is issued, bypassing Topco, and Prime Minister Azuma declares a nuclear emergency, the first in Japan's history. Communication is limited to satellite phones, and evacuation plans are hampered by blocked access routes. Officials announce that no radiation leaks have been reported, aiming to reassure the public. However, in the isolated building, Yoshida and his team scramble for solutions, including requesting mobile generators and fire trucks to inject water into the reactors. Workers attempt to use car batteries to power gauges, while discussions center on opening valves to cool the reactors. A team ventures into the reactor units, navigating darkness and hazardous conditions. Radiation meters spike, forcing them to retreat. Despite these setbacks, Furu arrives with protective equipment and radiation meters, enabling further efforts to stabilize the situation. Meanwhile, government officials struggle to define evacuation zones, eventually settling on a 3-kilometer radius as a precaution. Roads remain clogged, complicating efforts to transport critical equipment to the plant. As the meltdown clock ticks, news arrives of a high-voltage generator en route from northern Japan. Workers identify a functional switchboard in Unit 2, but connecting the generator proves challenging due to damaged infrastructure and impassable roads. Despite every effort, the team faces mounting obstacles. Saltwater has corroded critical systems, debris blocks access points, and time is running out. They faced the daunting task of laying down 200 meters of cable to establish the connection, a process typically dependent on heavy machinery due to the weight. However, under the cover of darkness, the team had no choice but to handle the labor manually. With helmet lights providing their only illumination, the workers pressed on, contending with intermittent tremors. Amidst their efforts, a startling realization hit: they were one person short. Their search led to the discovery of a colleague who had fallen into a water-filled manhole, the cover displaced earlier by the force of the tsunami. They quickly pulled him out, but their relief was short-lived as the ground trembled violently once again, forcing Yoshida to pause the operation. As they regrouped, an urgent message from the control room conveyed alarming news. The pressure within Unit 1's reactor was climbing, indicating that cooling efforts had failed. This failure stemmed from the initial shutdown of the isolation condenser system post-earthquake to prevent overcooling, a precaution that turned problematic when the subsequent power outage left it inoperative. Soon after, it became evident that the containment vessel's pressure had exceeded safe limits, threatening an imminent rupture. Yoshida proposed activating motor-operated valves for venting, which would release pressurized gas into the atmosphere. Azuma, upon hearing the plan, raised concerns about the safety of this procedure. An official explained that the gas would pass through water before release, significantly reducing its radioactivity. Although venting had never been attempted globally, the growing risk left them with no alternative. Complicating matters further was the lack of power to open the valves remotely. In the administrative building, workers searched through a chaotic maze of debris for schematics that could guide them in manually operating the valves. An aftershock rattled the structure, but fortunately, caused no injuries. Meanwhile, Azuma and government officials debated the evacuation radius and venting risks without reaching a resolution. With radiation levels around Unit 1 already too high for safe access, they feared a cascade of failures across Units 2 through 6, culminating in catastrophic explosions. Under mounting pressure, Azuma reluctantly approved the venting procedure. The workers uncovered the necessary piping diagrams, revealing that manual operation would require entering the highly contaminated reactor building. Yoshida informed the control room, and a grim decision loomed: assigning individuals to this perilous task. In Tokyo, a press conference announced the venting plan, though conflicting information emerged, with one official downplaying the severity by claiming only Unit 1 required venting. Frustrated by misinformation, Azuma decided to visit Fukushima too personally. Back at the plant, finding volunteers proved challenging. When the leader of the control room offered to take on the mission himself, his courage inspired others. Eventually, 3 two-person teams were assembled. Dressed in protective gear, the first team entered the reactor building, only to discover that radiation levels were dangerously higher than anticipated. They hurried to complete their task, successfully opening the first valve, but returning with the grim report of extreme exposure. The second team set out next, tasked with accessing an unshielded valve beyond a long bridge. As their dosimeters maxed out, they debated whether to continue. One worker argued the necessity of pushing forward to save lives, but the other, recognizing the futility of proceeding under such conditions, insisted they retreat. The team returned, and their clothing showed alarmingly high radiation levels, confirming the prudence of their decision. Despite setbacks, Yoshida's team devised an alternative strategy, connecting a compressor to apply pressure externally, potentially opening the valves remotely. Simultaneously, preparations for the third team continued. Volunteers from the replacement crew stepped forward, citing their familiarity with the plant layout. Just as the team departed, news arrived that white smoke was visible near the Unit 1 pipeline, a sign of progress. Yoshida quickly realized the smoke indicated water vapor escaping from the reactor, evidence that the compressor system was effectively venting pressure. Outside the Unit 1 structure, a team of workers toiled relentlessly to clear the rubble using heavy machinery. Their efforts finally allowed a fire truck to gain access, enabling preparations for the water pump to begin. As the crew connected hoses and moved more debris, they located the water inlet. Utilizing the fire truck, They swiftly began pumping water into the facility, aiming to stabilize the cooling process. Yoshida and the fire truck operator deliberated over the likelihood of having to switch to salt water once their freshwater reserves ran dry. Implementing this would require running a line all the way to the wharf. Despite protocol dictating the need for authorization before initiating such an action, Yoshida deemed it an unnecessary delay in the face of the crisis. Just then, another powerful aftershock rocked the area, causing significant structural damage. Ceiling sections crumbled, and the ominous sound of a distant explosion filled the air. Workers in the control room, now wearing masks, anxiously speculated about the source of the sound. News came that the 5th floor of the reactor building had been obliterated. Yoshida rushed outside to find injured workers and bent doors, which allowed contamination to seep into the building. Radiation levels inside now matched those outside. Urging his team to seal as many doors as possible, Yoshida donned protective gear and ventured out to assess the situation. Around the corner, he was confronted by a towering plume of smoke billowing from the reactor building. In Tokyo, an official alerted Azuma to turn on the news. The explosion's devastation was now broadcasted live. As Azuma demanded updates, officials struggled to provide clarity. Back at the site, the workers focused on rescuing the injured and monitoring contamination levels. Efforts to reseal the doors continued as damage to the hose running to the wharf hindered progress. Despite the chaos, the containment vessel, though exposed, remained intact. A resourceful worker suggested using hoses from outdoor fire hydrants as an alternative, and preparations began anew. In the capital, television reporters debated the potential radiation risk while assurances from Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO, suggested conditions remained under control. Officials attributed the explosion to hydrogen buildup, not a reactor malfunction. Radiation spikes caused by the blast had reportedly subsided. Meanwhile, TEPCO announced imminent power shortages in Tokyo, proposing rolling blackouts to manage the grid. Azuma, weighing the risks to hospitals and life support systems, reluctantly agreed to the plan. Back at the plant, Yoshida instructed his team to pump water from a backwash valve pit flooded by the tsunami. It was closer than the wharf and could expedite cooling. Shortly thereafter, news reached Azuma that the containment vessel's pressure was climbing again, prompting Yoshida's decision to proceed with saltwater injections. Concerns arose over impurities in salt water potentially triggering explosions. Murakami interrupted to discuss blackouts, emphasizing the need to prevent power surges that could cripple reactor restarts. After heated debates, Yoshida defied orders to suspend saltwater injections, secretly continuing the process. Hours later, as water levels stabilized, Azuma authorized the saltwater plan. However, when the flow ceased despite functioning hoses, a team was dispatched to locate the issue. They discovered a probable leak, forcing discussions on manually reopening valves. A team ventured into Unit 2's suppression chamber, where their shoes began melting and GM meters spiked alarmingly. The radiation forced them to retreat. Yoshida proposed using car batteries to power the valves. Workers in the control room connected the batteries into a massive circuit and attempted activation. When the initial effort failed, additional batteries were sourced, finally opening the valve and reducing reactor pressure. However, another explosion soon rocked Unit 3, shaking the facility to its core. Yoshida ran to a window and confirmed his fears. Unit 3 was destroyed. Radiation levels surged as workers in the area scrambled to escape. Those in a nearby fire truck kicked open its doors and rescued colleagues hiding beneath another vehicle. Many suffered severe injuries but miraculously survived. With their truck disabled, they retreated to the office on foot, encountering critically injured workers along the way. Despite their warnings, the group insisted on bringing them back for medical attention. The second explosion quickly made headlines, intensifying public concern. Meanwhile, Yoshida received alarming updates. Unit 4's temperature was rising due to a suspected leak caused by the blast, and Unit 2's water level was dropping rapidly. With just 5 hours before the fuel rods became exposed, the situation escalated further. In Tokyo, Azuma acknowledged the inevitability of raising the disaster level to 7, marking the worst nuclear event since Chernobyl. Moments later, the injured workers arrived at the office, transported in a vehicle they had managed to find. At the plant's entrance, staff examined the injured workers and discovered that their contamination levels are so extreme that proper diagnostics are impossible. Yoshida is informed that the fire truck is no longer functional. However, its pump remains operable, and a few workers are desperately attempting to continue injecting water into Unit 2. Complications arise as the explosion has sealed the valve, and the car batteries powering the system are no longer effective. The exposed fuel rods increase rapidly, situated on the 5th floor of each reactor building, a location fraught with irradiated debris and the looming risk of a containment vessel rupture. Faced with mounting stress, Yoshida prioritizes reopening Unit 2's valve while resuming efforts on Units 3 and 4, conscious of their shrinking timeline. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, a press conference addresses the second explosion, with officials claiming minimal radioactive dispersion. Online, fear and rumors proliferate, with many concluding that the nation faces inevitable ruin. Employees are blamed for the crisis, leading to a public witch hunt echoed by television hosts. These attacks deeply wound the families of those risking their lives at the plant. Back at the site, the Unit 2 valve remains stubbornly closed. A heated argument erupts between Yoshida and Murakami, culminating in Yoshida shouting at the TEPCO team, asserting his commitment to his workers' welfare, and abruptly ending the call. A bus arrives to evacuate the injured, but its capacity is insufficient for everyone. Amidst this chaos, a worker reports finding saltwater pooling in Unit 4's basement, which could potentially be redirected to cool the reactors. However, efforts to relocate fire trucks to Units 5 and 6 and break into Unit 4 reveal a new challenge. They lack enough hose to reach the basement. The control room soon delivers dire news. Unit 2's fuel rods are fully exposed. Yoshida, recognizing the gravity of the situation, instructs his assistant to prepare for evacuation. Calling TEPCO, he explains his intention to remain at the plant with a minimal crew to maintain water injections while evacuating everyone else. He faces the harrowing task of deciding who will stay behind. Azuma, upon hearing this, reacts with alarm but calms down upon realizing that some workers will still remain on site. Azuma later arrives at TEPCO headquarters, frustrated by the communication failures, and declares himself the new chief of operations. In a show of solidarity, he insists that everyone, including himself, must be ready to pay the ultimate sacrifice if necessary. Meanwhile, at the plant, the control room team attempts to replace a gauge battery when a tremor shakes the facility. Moments later, an explosion reverberates, and the suppression chamber pressure drops to 0, suggesting a potential breach. Radiation levels surge, and Yoshida dispatches workers to assess the situation. Shortly after, Units 3 and 4 report concussive sounds, signaling an impending radiation spike. Acknowledging the futility of further efforts, Yoshida requests TEPCO's approval for evacuation, which Murakami reluctantly grants. The evacuation is formally announced, and team leaders select individuals to stay behind. As buses arrive to transport most workers away, emotional farewells ensue. The remaining team is allowed brief calls to their families before resuming their critical tasks. Overhead, a helicopter from a news agency captures footage, while reports circulate of foreigners fleeing the country, overwhelming airports. Outside, workers attempt to establish a new hose connection but encounter issues with water flow. Azuma consults an advisor about initiating a cold shutdown, though uncertainties linger about controlling the reactors. The advisor outlines the catastrophic consequences of reactor explosions, forced relocation within a 170-kilometer radius, evacuation of areas up to 250 kilometers, and a collapse of Japan's economy. The Minister of Defense, though hesitant due to the risk of hydrogen explosions, agrees to deploy aircraft to explore alternative solutions. At the plant, workers struggle to repair the truck. Yoshida contacts an expert for guidance who offers to come in person, but Yoshida declines, unwilling to risk another life. White smoke begins emanating from Unit 4, indicating evaporating pool water. Meanwhile, Azuma negotiates with the US president, urging him to refrain from inciting panic by encouraging Americans in Japan to leave. In return, the president demands transparency regarding the plant and involvement of US nuclear experts in policy discussions. Though controversial, Azuma agrees to prioritize US cooperation. As the smoke diminishes, a sign that the pool water has evaporated completely, Yoshida learns that the fire truck repair remains stalled. Just when hope seems lost, the expert arrives at the plant, determined to protect his family living nearby. Concurrently, military aircraft equipped with radiation-blocking materials prepare for water dumping operations. Despite strong westerly winds, the first water drop is successful, followed by another shortly thereafter. Soldiers leave after completing their mission, and the expert fixes the truck, enabling mobile pumps to resume spreading water across all units. Within an hour, nearly 100 tons of water are injected, and the team celebrates a brief victory. Another aftershock strikes, but the plant sustains no additional damage. Yoshida informs TEPCO of their progress, though Azuma's conversation with the US president reveals the evacuation order for Americans remains in place. Media backlash intensifies, accusing the administration of concealing information and jeopardizing Japan's alliance with the US. However, this marks the beginning of accelerated US-Japan cooperation, with naval vessels delivering nuclear experts and critical equipment. The plant's efforts stabilize the reactors, allowing the remaining team to vacate the control room. By April, a month after the crisis began on March 11th, dismantling operations commence, a process projected to take decades. 6 years later, in 2017, nuclear fuel remains within the reactors, inaccessible due to extreme radiation levels. By 2019, strategies emerge for moving hazardous debris, though storage solutions remain elusive. The region's once thriving communities are now ghost towns, with thousands of abandoned homes and perished livestock. Wild animals, however, reclaim the land, thriving in the absence of humans. Cancer claims Yoshida's life in 2013 at the age of 58, likely due to radiation exposure, though he attributes it to his smoking habit. His testimony, published posthumously, serves as a powerful record of resilience and sacrifice. A decade later, in 2023, the disaster's aftermath remains unresolved, with decommissioning work continuing as a testament to the enduring legacy of the crisis. And that's the incredible story of bravery, sacrifice, and the fight to save a nation during one of the worst nuclear disasters in history. What do you think about the sacrifices these heroes made? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories and movie insights. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload. See you in the next one.